Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The transformation of downtown Central Station tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a roundtable of people involved with and watching the project downtown. June West from Memphis Heritage. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Alex Turley, a developer with Henry Turley Companies.
Thanks for having me.
Ron Garrison, the head of MATA. Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. And Archie Willis from Community Capital. Thank you all for being here. Let's start with you, Alex, and maybe just give an overview for people who haven't seen the details of what's been proposed for the project down at Central Station, the various components, some more firm than others, we get that, but outline the project for us.
Well, at Central Station, we're working on a project that includes transforming the apartment portion of the property into a boutique hotel with a movie theater that would be operated by Malco at the corner of the property at G. Patterson and Front Street. And we would essentially continue the residential development that we started really 20 years ago at South Bluffs and most recently with South Junction and sort of connect the south side of Central Station with additional residential development, and we would propose to keep the farmers market as a integral, centerpiece of the project. So it would be an authentically mixed-use development.
Right. So a mix of a hotel, some more residential, the Malco movie theater. There's talk of a grocery store with Deacon Alley, the longtime Memphis company, but that's still pretty tentative, but it's been out there that's been talked about. Okay, we'll go through some more of those details. But Ron Garrison, MATA owns the building, correct?
Well, the city owns it.
The city owns the building, but MATA's involved. Why?
Well, the city owns the building, but it can only be used for transit use, and it was intended for MATA, and that's where we're involved, and we maintain it and lease it out, et cetera.
Yeah, but in the presentation that went to, I think, the finance committee of the MATA board, one of the benefits was that it sort of gets MATA out of the real estate business. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, out of the real estate business is a good thing for MATA. We need to focus on transit and getting folks to where they need to be. Okay, and we'll talk more about the MATA role, and the Amtrak will still be there, which isn't MATA really, but we'll talk some more details. Archie Willis, funding a project like this, you've been involved a lot for what we talked about 15 years before the show, funded all kinds of projects around. What are the challenges or the opportunities in terms of funding this sort of project?
Well, in this case, it's a fairly unique situation, actually. We are working with, as you mentioned and Alex mentioned, other development partners. So part of the challenge is identifying those partners, and then they will bring their funding and financing to the table to combine with a small amount of funding we're requesting from the public sector, primarily for what we call public and civic improvements. But the primary funding sources will be funding provided through the various development partners. For example, the hotel developers will bring their own financing to the table. We will be involved directly with the apartments. We'll bring financing to the project. Malco will bring their financing to the project, and the civic component will be used to enhance the farmers market and to do some other enhancements to the property that we think will make it a much more viable and vital situation.
And overall, it's estimated as a $55 million
$55 million project.
And the public component would be?
The public component is $3 million and $52 million of private investment.
Okay, and the $3 million, do you know where, are you going to the county, the city?
We're actually working with MATA to pursue grants that they are eligible for.
I see.
They will need a 20% match. So in theory, we get $3 million. They will get 2.4 from a grant, And then the local, it could be government, it could be philanthropic supporters as well, will provide $600,000 for the 20% match.
Okay, and we'll break down a little bit more. But Gene West, so from a historic point of view, it's obviously an iconic building. The importance, not just to this building, but in the context of a whole lot of, I guess from your point of view, wins in terms of historic, not just preservation, but massive redevelopments from Overton Square to the brewery right down, a couple blocks from this project to Crosstown and on and on and on.
I feel like the city's on a wave. We may not call it historic preservation, we may call it restoration of important buildings or whatever. It seems to be historic preservation may be a dirty word these days, and I don't mean that in jest, but basically the redevelopment of all these properties in Central Station, I'm extremely excited about the Central Station project. It brings density to that area, and having our offices on South Main a long time ago, I saw the give and take that was happening, people being there almost too soon and then not making it and whatever. And I think this density of people being there, either by hotel or apartments, I can't think of a better thing to be able to go spend the night in the hotel and get on the early morning New Orleans train, because nobody wants to drive and get there that early. So there are all sorts of components that make this a win-win situation. I love the transparency around the Powerhouse, which is an iconic building into itself. I love tying the street, Front Street into Main Street. I think that's tremendously valid, and I think it just shows that historic properties like that can be exciting once they're handled in an appropriate way.
Yeah, Bill.
Archie, in terms of assembling financing, we've seen one project just in the last few months that came to fruition at Crosstown that involved numerous financing partners on this. Is this different because the different pieces are handling the financing, or does this work about the same?
It's actually different. Crosstown, and we weren't involved with Crosstown, but we're somewhat familiar with it just because we keep up with that kind of activity. It was a very complex project. It's a huge project, first of all. 800,000, I think it was, square feet or something like that.
Over a million.
Yeah, with various components. So they had new market tax credits, for example. They're trying to use historic tax credits. Combining those two, each set of tax credits has their own rules and regulations. Combining tax credits is challenging in and of itself. The whole notion of public-private use and the separation of private components versus public components creates potential funding. So theirs was much, much more complicated. In our case, again, with the development partners we are working with, they will bring financing to the table, and they will have to go through their normal processes to get funding from the banks and investment sources that they typically use, but it won't be quite as complicated. And just to make a comment on June, part of our strategy is to get historic tax credits. So we are certainly honoring the historic character of the building, and part of that will hopefully allow us to generate some additional tax credits for the property.
Yeah.
Alex, we talked about this a bit before the show. If you look at the map of what is happening around that parcel of property, regardless of what it is there, this is really like the piece of a puzzle that kind of links all of those things together that have been happening for some time on the south end.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at the we're tracking the development that's occurring south of Beale Street right now, and when you look at Chisca, the brewery, sort of the Front Street corridor, where you picture where Gus's Chicken is, and where the distillery is being built, and there's apartment projects planned there. You sort of have this linking of the CBD to South Main, and the Central Station project sort of creates that link from the river to South Main. So
even to the Horizon, which is the big project that went dormant in the recession.
It's now the Artesian.
The Artesian.
It's under development now, and so we're excited about the opportunity of creating sort of an anchor to the South Main, for the South Main merchants that should, sort of the just new offerings for downtown. I mean, we hear it daily from our residents. Can you get us a movie theater and a grocery store? I mean, it's just consistently, that's what people want.
Right.
And I think it's it's really a testament to where downtown is and its development right now.
Ron, in terms of Amtrak, are you talking with them? Are you involved in talks with that, or how does that work? Because there has been a lot of talk over a lot of years about increasing Amtrak service here.
Yeah, Amtrak will remain there. They have a lease, and the property is been put in place in such a way that there has to be rail there for it to maintain its status. We have talked with Amtrak, and you know, as far as them increasing service, you know, we'll find that out in the future. What I'm more interested in is up on top where the buses are, moving those down onto Front Street, creating a new station for the trolleys, and connecting service for our disabled and elderly customers. Those taking the buses down, and then being able to quickly get on the trolley at the trolley station with a great venue, you know, making it look really nice, and then they have access to all of the amenities there too. This will really improve the quality of life, you know, in that entire community there.
And the trolley stop that's at the station, as I understand it, now you have it on G.E. Patterson, and I believe the plan here is to make a central trolley stop a little bit further on Main Street, on the Main Street side of the station.
That's our hopes. If we can combine the stations, we have to look at the engineering, but yes, if we can take that station out and combine that into one station there on Front Street, you know, it would be a trolley station, it'd be for a paratransit, it'd be for our buses, so it could be kind of multimodal and very easy for folks to then, you know, even if they take their bike or walk, to jump right on the trolley or the bus to go where they want to go.
Right, and Archie, when you presented this to the Finance Committee at MATA, you talked about kind of changing the access to the property, so that now that there would be access into the larger market area that includes the farmers market right off of that trolley stop there on Main.
Yeah, that's correct. If you recall the presentation, one of the points we make, and it's, you may not think about it, but it's pretty obvious if you do. The train station itself is a barrier from the east to the west. So if you're on Main Street, how do you get west of that physical barrier? You literally have to walk around the block. So we're trying to do two different things. One, we want to create what we're calling a connector concourse that will be in an opened area from Main Street that will go through under the platform and connect to what we call the Market Plaza on the western part of the property. The same Market Plaza will have an entryway off of G. Patterson. And if they're able to relocate the trolley stop, then that opens up that area by the powerhouse, and we'll create this great, what we think will be a great civic space. And there'll be a Market Plaza where people can gather before they go to the movie, after the movie. Ideally, we may get some retail development under the platform. If we can work that out, it'll be a great connector there. But it just creates a great space for people to gather and also provide that connectivity down G. Patterson into the Market Plaza, or through this concourse from Main Street into the Market Plaza.
June, the history of the structure is pretty obvious, but talk to me about historic preservation, because I think sometimes people have the idea that historic preservation is it has to stay exactly as it is now with the same uses, and that's not the case at all.
No, not at all. And actually, in most cases, it's an adaptive reuse of something that the building was not used for. I totally understand that this is a modal situation because of the trains and Amtrak. The building itself is a wonderful building. It is a landmark for that corner of South Main, of course. And using it this way in a pedestrian urban design is going to make that building a much more effective building. You're not really changing the building, you're changing what's around it, if you will. You're adding things to it, but not in a distractive way, not in a detrimental way. And I think that's the key to good design, and I think they've come up with a really good design where they're not covering up the building with what their additions are. There's a lot of transparency, visual transparency, and I think it will be a real boon for South Main.
So I'll put you on the spot. Roughly how many residential units, or I don't know how you would count it, are going in that South Main area right now? New and underway? I mean, is it hundreds? Is it thousands? I mean, if people haven't driven down there, it's pretty, if you go past to I guess that would be to the south of Central Station, there's a huge amount of apartments going in there. Again, we talked about the Horizon, the Artesian coming on. What are the numbers?
So if you go from Crump to Beale Street and from Riverside to essentially, let's go to Second, because there's a development that's occurring right there where Happy Mexican Restaurant is too.
Right.
And if you include what we have planned at Central Station in terms of the additional apartments, it's around 1,150
Right.
new residential units in that area.
And then Turley Company, Henry Turley obviously developed Harbortown, much of Harbortown, but then other developers get involved. I mean, is that sort of what happens, this sort of virtuous circle from your point of view or from the residents' point of view, more people begets more people?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, okay.
And we like when more developers come in and develop projects downtown for sure.
Moving slightly to the, I guess that would be to the east. The I guess really last of the big housing projects is still there. Your company's been involved with the redevelopments of all but one, I think we said before the show, of the big redevelopments. So the one next to Methodist Hospital or at the corner of Lamar, and I mean the really blighted properties that were there are now these really quite lovely, I mean, for lack of a better word, and you all have been part of the financing public-private partnership.
Right.
What is the status of the one that is, what is it called again?
Foot Homes.
Foot Homes, thank you. It was on deck that it was going to be demolished and rebuilt. There was some community opposition. Their funding is never easy. It was a recession. What's the status of that?
The current status is actually the Housing Authority issued a RFQ for a new developer last year. They chose McCormick Baron Salazar out of St. Louis, which actually were our partners on the development of University Place, the former Lamar Terrace, and Legends Park, the former Dixie Homes. So the application was submitted to HUD for a Choice Neighborhoods grant.
Right.
Choice Neighborhoods is the successor program to Hope 6 under the Obama administration. So it's a very similar concept, except Choice is a much more expansive project. It requires that you do more in the surrounding community than was required under Hope 6, where you really just focused on the public housing site.
Right.
So that application was submitted in February. The city and the Housing Authority should hear back on the shortlisting in July if HUD keeps to their timetable, with final selection in September. So if that comes to fruition, then that will begin the process of the transformation of Foot Homes, which will fit nicely into everything we're talking about now in terms of Central Station, to really take the development eastward to meet the Claiborne Homes site, which is now Heritage Landing, which has already been redeveloped.
Okay. And Ron, back to MATA for a second. I mean, some folks maybe watch and still go, well, wait, the head of MATA's on, and they've got, struggling with the trolleys right now, and challenges. You've been in the job 6 months, and you've talked about challenges with how do you serve a really big metropolis with bus service when your funding has been shrinking. Again, this is from MATA's point of view. I'm just looking at the presentation to the Finance Board. It relieves, provides ongoing revenue to MATA. It relieves a debt obligation. Is that correct? I mean, again, to repeat, it gets you out of the business, not into the business of planning.
It does a number of things, Eric. One, we do have some maintenance that needs to be done on the facility that we can't afford to do.
Yeah.
We do have debt service on the facility that we cannot pay back right now. So, Archie and the Turley Group coming in and doing this helps us focus on transit and put our monies what would be the greatest use for getting people where they need to go in Memphis.
Right. And so we've talked about the trolleys. We're taping this on Wednesday. The show obviously plays on Friday and over the weekend. You've got changes happening with the trolley. Give us an update on the trolleys. People asking, when will the trolleys be back? When will service be restored, et cetera? Give us.
Well, Memphis in May is right around the corner. We've been working with our engineers looking at the area of the mall where the buses and the trolleys don't go. So how do we get that to work for the businesses? So what we've done is we've trained all of our operators. We've got new signage going up. We've had the engineers look at it, and we're getting ready to do a press release today to put the buses back on the mall and to make them integrate with the rest of the buses that simulate trolley service. And we're working on getting some other vehicles so that when there's crush loads, we can have additional capacity to make Memphis in May and the opening of Bass Pro Shop work and all those things.
Yeah. Before the trolleys were shut down, roughly how many people rode the trolleys every year downtown?
It varied from year to year. I think last year was 1.1 million.
Yeah, right. Because people think of it as a little bit of a tourist. And there are tourists on there and so on, but it's also become clear, it seems, to the South Main merchants and all the Main Street merchants, downtown merchants. They really rely on those trolleys to generate business and I guess then generate tax revenue. So it's not just a novelty item.
No, it's not, Eric. And I'll just say this one thing. If we can do what we need to do and what we want to do, we can bring service back in such a way that ridership has tripled, 3 million folks, and bring businesses, customers in such a way that it would really bring economic viability back in a big way to downtown.
Yeah, okay. And go ahead.
Are these the green buses that we've been seeing that you're talking about on the mall during this run? Okay. And is this going to start in May, or is it going to start late April?
We're starting on April 12th.
April 12th.
Right.
So this weekend.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Let me switch back to the train station and the assembly of the partners here, the selection of the partners in all of this, because these are companies that are bedrock Memphis. The three players that we're talking about, the Wilson companies, the Canale family, as well as who am I leaving out? Cummins Wilson companies as well.
The Malco.
The Malco too. I knew it would come to me. So
and the Turley family.
And the Willis.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Willis family.
Exactly. This is really, aside from the art of the deal here, though, these Memphis companies being involved really speaks to kind of a moment in our development, I think.
I agree. I think it's a testament to sort of what's happening downtown, and the fact that our residential population has gotten to this point, and where these companies that, as you said, we're talking 100-year-old companies, et cetera, are investing in this project, and it's very exciting. We definitely think that dynamic is important and notable.
Jen. Yeah, Jen.
Well, and to mention, one of the things that we've seen in preservation situations in Memphis is, if you look at the success stories we've had with Broad, Overton Square, what we will see downtown, it's local investment. It's local individuals that understand our city and know what its citizens want. It's Billy Orgel buying the brewery. It's not, I don't want to say we don't want outside money, we do, but we, as concerned about how our city stays in some ways, locals get it sometime, and some people coming in do, but I'm just so grateful that the local bedrocks are behind this type of program, because it makes us feel in a preservation and thinking about historic properties as being valuable again, and I think that's tremendously important to our city.
We just have about 4 minutes left. You've got news in the sense that Memphis Heritage, for the first time, will begin. You're raising money to do grants
to become a funding agency.
Yeah, talk real quickly about what that involves.
Well, we're very fortunate. We received a $1 million donation. We plan on raising $3 million for the New Century Fund, and our game plan is to fund programs so that we're preventing things as opposed to addressing emergency situations. Right now, the board decided to jump in instead of waiting till we had the full $3 million and support MemFix, which we feel bang for the buck. They're always in historic neighborhoods. They look at potential. They show people what can happen in a certain area of our city. And so we are partnering with MemFix going forward on their projects. MemFix actually in the Pinch this weekend on Saturday the 11th is our first program that we're collaborating with MemFix on.
Yeah, and what happens with the Pinch? I mean, there's talk of it losing its historic status. I mean, it's been stuck in the limbo of the shadow of the limbo of Bass Pro.
Right. Well, thanks to Lee Harris, Senator Lee Harris, it will not be taken off the National Register now. It won't be addressed in Nashville, so therefore it will just be there. And we're very grateful, because that means the owners of those properties can apply for historic tax credits if they go into renovation.
Right. And is that your next sort of priority area, or is that fair to say?
I think it's a very important area, and I think what we've seen is we need to maintain what's still there. We lost so much when the pyramid was built. There was no control on people saying, I want a surface parking lot. So I think we need to say to the merchants and business owners and property owners, you are important. And it kind of gets back to that pedestrian bridge thing where we're trying to get people into the Pinch to see that historic value.
Right. From a developer point of view, I mean, is the Pinch, what are developers saying about the Pinch? Do they still need to see Bass Pro open? Do they need to see a connector between the Bass Pro and the Pinch? I mean, is it still just too uncertain for development to really happen there?
Yeah, I think as you said, the Bass Pro, sort of the fact that Bass Pro is facing south, the entrance that we can see, makes us look at the Pinch as an area that should develop organically. It's how I would see it.
More like Broad Street, perhaps. But at the same time, I see potential there because a lot of developers like blank spaces to work in.
Right.
And you've certainly got a lot of blank spaces in that area.
What about, again, from a development point of view, and maybe from a finance point of view, one thing that hasn't done real well downtown is office. Paul Moores from downtown Memphis was on recently. He said, well, at the very least, we've stopped losing, but a lot of office spaces moved out to the kind of Ridgeway Poplar. What's your take on that? How does that change, or can
our
that
future
change?
Opportunity should be around attracting different kinds of companies downtown. You know, you think of the Startcos, and it was covered recently in an article. I mean, it's the the Archer Malmos of the world. Those types of smaller companies that are trying to attract millennial folks to come work there. And I think that developments like Central Station help in that effort to attract those kinds of companies downtown.
Okay.
So, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you all for being here. Alex Hurley, June West, Ron Garrison, Archie Willis. Thank you all. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.
Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.